All right, everybody, welcome back. Thank you for coming back. If this is your first time, I welcome you, and I hope you come back to future videos. This is Metal Shop Steve. I am Steve, and you know what? We're just talking about metal. We're reviewing albums. Today, we're reviewing an album. We are going to talk about the 1991 release, Slave to the Grind by Skid Row. Great second album by this group. If you're not familiar with Skid Row, they had a couple of big hits on their first album with 18 and Life and I Remember You and Youth Gone Wild. So following up is always a tough job, but we're going to talk about that follow-up album a little bit here. As happens a lot of times, the sound changes up a little bit from album to album. No different here. They actually have a heavier, faster sound on this second album. Slave to the Grind was really is more of a metal album, I feel, than the first one. The first one was, you know, it had its high points, it had its low points, but a really good, solid first album. But that one was really, it was angsty in like a youth gone wild. A very, very, you know, angry, angsty youth kind of album. A lot of anthems on there, some good stuff. And I would say, although some people might disagree with me here, but I would say on the second album, on Slave to the Grind, these guys grew up a little bit, and if it's possible, the sound matured a little bit. There are a lot of things that separate the first album from the second album for me. Again, as I said, heavier, faster, I would say more adult-sounding metal. The second album moved a little bit more into social issues on a broader scale, maybe more adult type of themes, although they certainly had their fun on the second album as well. So Slave to the Grind, it really features some songs about you know, political consciousness and social consciousness, homelessness, drug addiction, just, you know, a whole bunch of really gritty stuff. And I would say gritty is a great, great, great word to describe Slave to the Grind. It is a gritty album all the way around, musically, lyrically, even the look of the album is very gritty. A couple of notes about the album here just before we get really into the music itself. It was a double platinum certified album again, and some of that, as happens with metal bands, is it was, I would say, thanks in part probably to their power ballads. I kind of hate using that term because I don't like the term power ballad. I don't even like the term ballad that much. You know, it's just another great rock and roll song, another great metal song. It just has a different feel to it, a little bit slower, maybe a little bit quieter. Power ballad doesn't really do it for me. Just, you know, another metal song on here. But on this album, we're really talking about Quicksand Jesus. We're talking about Wasted Time, In a Darkened Room. And I believe those were all singles, and they did fairly well for this album. So there's where you're getting some of the sales. One interesting note before we, again, talk more, I kind of jump ahead of myself a little bit. This album, as many of you may know if you're Skid Row fans or metal fans in general, this album actually came out in two different versions. There was a clean version, and then there was the explicit version. The difference being, the explicit version had a song called Get the F Out. The clean version replaced that song with a song called Beggar's Day. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but if you want my opinion straight off, I'm not even sure why they did this to begin with. Beggar's Day, in my opinion, is a far superior song. So let's talk about the group a little bit. And for my money, you know, this group is great musically. They're thrashy, they're hard, they're gritty. But for me, and I said this if you watched my previous review, I love bands that can sing. And for me, Sebastian Bach is possibly the ultimate, or one of the ultimate metal singers. His voice, just for me, defines metal, especially on this album. And I think that's one of the areas where this band really matured. It's gritty, and then it goes from gritty to soft and soaring. Just, you know, from one note to the next, he can just jump right from style to style in terms of the way he can sing. And I just think that is so spot on metal for me. Another place that this happens, and not surprisingly, this is, I think, one of the best ways to ever open an album. Slave to the Grind opens up with Monkey Business. The album, it starts out with this kind of lazy, bluesy little, quiet opening, and you're not really sure what's happening, and then he just rises to the occasion. The music, his voice, that opening scream is just, I get chills every time I hear it. This song's always rocked out in my car. It's one of the ultimate openings, and I think there are a lot of fans out there who would agree with me on that one. So let's get into the songs a little bit here. Slave to the Grind, Monkey Business. We're talking about life on the streets. We're talking about drug addiction. We're talking about politicians' refusal to deal with it. Remember, this is 1991, and this is a band who was picking up on some of the vibe going on then. There are a lot of other songs. There are a lot of other songs on this album too that deal with that. Chain Gang and Mud Kicker and Riot Act, and all of these are just kind of in the way that the original Skid Row album was youthy and angsty. These are the songs that really push this into political climate. 20-somethings, maybe even 30-somethings. Of course, anybody can relate to this. Really, it just depends on who you are and when you're listening to it at the time. But they're just kind of tapping into that. They're clawing into it, I would say, because it's just so it's raw. I think the whole album is just very raw. And then you have these little soft spots here and there. I already played you a little bit from Wasted Time. I think that's a great example too of a band being able to just kind of change the tempo up a little bit. Although I love a Skid Row power ballad, or whatever you want to call it. They did the same thing with I Remember You on the first album. It's soft, but it's not too soft. It's still got enough of an edge. It's still raw enough. It still rocks enough to kind of keep it, for me, off of something that you might consider just a pure ballad. In a Darkened Room, kind of the same way. It's the same kind of a feel. Quicksand Jesus, he's still doing the same kind of things with his voice here in the softer songs or in the louder songs, or pretty much all over the album. And the rest of the band follows suit. Again, back to the one little part that we talked about. For me, Get the F Out was not really a necessary song here. In fact, they probably could have just released the album as the clean version that they released with Beggar's Day, and then kept the other song off there for maybe a B-side or a lost track or something for later on, and just had gone with Beggar's Day, because, again, I really just believe that that's one of the most solid songs on here. It's tough to follow up a hit album, and that's what they had with their first album, their first release. It was a hit album because it hit all the right chords at the time. It was 88 or 89, somewhere in that range, and they were just feeling it. They were flowing right along with all the other hair metal that was out there, tapping into that, as I said, youthy, angsty kind of vibe. And I really believe that they followed it up with probably my favorite Skid Row album. I definitely think that this is the pinnacle for me of Sebastian Bach's voice. I think that he reaches new heights in this album, and I don't really know if they ever really duplicate just the pure raw rock and roll of this album in any of their future albums. That's not saying, again, it's no judgment on any of their other future albums or anything like that. But again, for me, this is the top Skid Row album out there. I was really excited that this was my album to review today, and if you look back on my website at my very first post, this is really only my second video, and I hope to have a new one every week. But one of the reasons that I did Extreme and Skid Row as back-to-back videos is, as long as luck holds out, in a couple of weeks I'm going to be going to the M3 Rock Festival down around DC, and I'm going to see Extreme and Skid Row playing there live, and I'm very, very excited about that. I've actually never seen either one of those bands, and I can tell you that the week after that happens, that's what my video is going to be about. So if you're looking for another album review that week, You'll have to hold it off till the next because I'm definitely going to talk about that show or those shows. I thank those of you who have already subscribed and commented, and I welcome the rest of you to get on board. And we're really taking a fun ride here. I'm enjoying it. That's why I'm doing it. And hopefully somebody else can watch my videos and enjoy them as well. Again, please subscribe, comment, talk to me, like the videos if you like them. Tell me down below in the comments, tell me what you want to see. What do you want me to talk about? If you have an album that I haven't mentioned or that you think it would just be fun for me to give a listen and talk about, please let me know down below. As always, I'm going to include some fun links in the comments down below as well. Probably link to some Skid Row stuff here. And, again, come along for the ride, and hopefully you'll have a good time. And again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.